He had lived next door to her for 4 years. In that time, he had helped her carry groceries twice, watched her cat for 11 days, and stood at her door with a bottle of wine on the night she told him her mother had died. On the morning the agents came, he was making coffee. He watched them walk her out in handcuffs from the window above his kitchen sink. It was only then, standing there, cup still warm in his hand, that he realized he had never once asked her last name. Martin had retired from teaching history at a small college in Ohio at 64. He had moved to the city for the reasons people sometimes do at that age: a narrower life, less to manage, the particular freedom of a place where no one remembered who you had been. He found an apartment in a building with 12 units and tall ceilings and the quiet of a place where people were polite and busy and did not ask more than was offered. Eleanor lived in the unit beside his. She was quiet in the way that can read, at first, as distance, and then settles into something closer to self-possession. She worked from home, appraising antiques, consulting for estates and auction houses when they needed someone who could assess a collection quickly and accurately. She traveled often, sometimes for weeks at a time. Before each trip she would knock on his door with a spare key and a short list of instructions for the plant on her kitchen windowsill. She always came back with something small: a tin of tea from Istanbul, a carved wooden box from Lisbon, a paper bag of almonds from somewhere in southern Spain, left on his doormat without a note. Martin had been working, loosely, on a book. He had started it in his last semester of teaching and continued it without urgency or deadline in the years since. It was about the displacement of cultural objects, the colonial period, the legal mechanisms that allowed looted work to remain in private hands for generations, the growing gap between what property law permitted and what an honest accounting of history might eventually demand. It was not a book anyone was waiting for, but it kept him reading, and that had become reason enough. The morning Eleanor was arrested, it was raining. Martin counted 4 agents and 2 vehicles from his window. He watched until the second car turned the corner. Then he set his cup down and went to get dressed. He did not know why. He simply did not want to be standing at a window in his bathrobe when someone knocked. Someone knocked 20 minutes later. The agent who spoke to him was polite and unremarkable. He wanted to know how long Martin had known Eleanor, what he understood about her work, whether she received visitors regularly, whether anything had ever seemed unusual. Martin answered honestly. 4 years, antiques appraisal, occasional visitors he could not identify, nothing that had registered as strange. The agent thanked him and left. That was the end of Martin's formal involvement. It was not the end of his attention. He was a historian. He could not help himself. The charges were made public 3 days later. Theft, interstate transport of stolen property, fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy. The federal complaint ran to 47 pages. Martin printed it at the copy shop around the corner and read it at his kitchen table with a pot of coffee and a yellow highlighter, the same way he had read primary sources for 30 years. What Eleanor had done, what the complaint laid out in careful, prosecutorial language, was this: over approximately 22 years, working beneath the surface of a legitimate appraisal business, she had identified objects of cultural significance that had been removed from their countries of origin through what she documented, in her own private records, as improper acquisition. Wartime looting, colonial seizure, fraudulent sales conducted during periods of political instability, when the sellers had no legal authority to sell and the buyers knew it and purchased anyway. Objects that belonged, by her documented assessment, to the institutions and communities they had come from. She had arranged for them to go back, sometimes through legitimate means, filing documentation with customs authorities, working with foreign cultural ministries, alerting journalists and advocacy organizations. Those methods were slow and uncertain and, according to a private ledger the government had seized, succeeded approximately 30% of the time. The rest of the time she used other methods. Over 2 decades she had arranged the quiet removal of objects from private collections, estate sales, and at least 2 major auction house inventories. The objects did not come to her. They moved through a network of intermediaries she had built and maintained across 3 continents, a shipping logistics coordinator in Amsterdam, a retired customs official in Lisbon, a museum conservator in Nairobi she had known since graduate school, and they went, directly and specifically, to the institutions that had originally held them. A set of bronze ceremonial figures to a national museum in Lagos. a collection of carved temple panels to a cultural preservation society outside Phnom Penh. A manuscript, 600 years old, to a university library in Rabat that had been formally requesting its return for 40 years without ever receiving a reply. She made no money. The complaint noted this several times, as though the investigators had searched for the profit motive and kept arriving at the same blank space. Her financial records showed a woman living on modest appraisal fees. The objects she had moved were worth, in aggregate, somewhere between $60 and $90 million at current market valuation. None of that had passed through her accounts. What the government was prosecuting was the method: the forged provenance documents, the falsified export permits, the deliberate deception of estate administrators, private collectors, and auction house staff who had trusted her professional assessments. The conspiracy charges named 2 other individuals, including a shipping coordinator in Amsterdam named Hendrik Voss. He was 61 years old. He had worked in international freight logistics for 30 years and had no prior criminal record. When investigators asked why he had done it, he told them he had started in 2009 because he believed what they were doing was right, and had continued because that belief had not changed. A prosecutor quoted in the coverage called this a sentiment that did not constitute a legal defense. No one quoted in the article said the prosecutor was wrong. Martin spent the weekend reading further. He found accounts of 2 of the specific objects named in the complaint in academic papers he had read years earlier without connecting them to any living person. One described the manuscript's absence from the Rabat library as a loss without clear legal remedy. Another described the bronze figures as held in a private collection that declined to provide provenance documentation. He read those sentences again. He thought about what it meant to read them now, knowing what had become of those objects after those papers were published. He went to his bookshelf and pulled down 3 volumes he had annotated heavily in the final decade of his teaching. 2 he had written, 1 he had contributed chapters to. He sat with them open around him at the kitchen table and read until past midnight. They were about cultural displacement, about the legal mechanisms that had allowed objects removed under colonial duress to become, over time, simply property. Insured and catalogued, bought and sold and donated to institutions that displayed them in temperature-controlled rooms, labeled with acquisition dates and countries of origin but not with the particular circumstances of how they had arrived. He had written about the gap between what ownership law permitted and what history might eventually demand. He had written about individuals who, across different periods, had taken unilateral action to preserve or restore cultural property outside legal frameworks. He had written about them analytically, with appropriate ambivalence. He had not imagined knowing one. He thought about his book. 3 chapters complete, the rest in notes. He had been working on it for 3 years, slowly and without urgency, and it had come to feel more like a permanent condition than a project. Something he was always doing rather than something he would finish. He had never asked what finishing it would require of him. A letter arrived from Eleanor's attorney in November, asking whether he would be willing to serve as a character witness. Martin set it on the kitchen table. He looked at it for 2 days before he called the number at the bottom. The attorney's name was Clark. She was precise and asked good questions and did not try to shape what he might say. She explained the scope of character testimony, what it addressed, what it did not. She told him the case would likely resolve in a plea before trial, but that sentencing testimony could affect the outcome materially. She did not tell him Eleanor was innocent of the charges. She did not ask him to believe otherwise. She asked only whether he could speak, honestly, to the person he had known for 4 years. At the end of their meeting, almost in passing, she said, "The law is not equipped to weigh what Eleanor was trying to accomplish against how she accomplished it." That is not a failure of her argument. It is simply what the law is for. Martin thought about that sentence on the train home. He stopped at the museum he visited on Sunday afternoons. He walked through 3 galleries he had passed through many times before. He stopped in front of a display case he had walked past for years without slowing. He read the small printed cards beside each piece. Acquisition date, country of origin, collection history. He thought about what the cards did not say. He thought about whether the people who had come from the same places as those objects ever walked through this gallery. Whether they stopped here, whether they read the cards, or whether they already knew everything the cards left out. He stood there for a long time. He thought about the tin of tea from Istanbul, still sitting on his kitchen shelf, half full. He thought about the other boxes. He had helped carry them upstairs more than once. He had not asked what was in them. Then he went home and called Clark and told her he would testify. The plea came in March, 6 weeks before the trial date. Eleanor accepted it, 22 months, reduced to 14 with good behavior. 2 years of supervised release. A financial restitution agreement with several of the auction houses whose inventories had been affected, though the objects themselves could not be reclaimed. Most had already passed into institutional collections abroad, and the legal frameworks for recovering them were, as Martin noted with some precision in his own mind, extremely complicated. He was not called to testify. He sat in the gallery on the morning of the sentencing, in a row near the back, and watched a woman he had known as a neighbor read a prepared statement to a judge. She did not apologize for the goal. She apologized for the methods. She said she understood the difference between them. She said she had understood it the entire time. The judge sentenced her to 14 months. He described her actions as a serious breach of the law and a deliberate subversion of the systems that legitimate property transfer depends on. He also said, in language that surprised Martin by its directness, that the moral complexity of what she had done was not invisible to the court. That the court was simply not empowered to act on it. Martin drove home in the rain. He made dinner. He sat at the kitchen table and thought about a word he had used in his teaching for most of his adult life. A word he had always been careful to present in the passive, to frame as a subject of ongoing debate, to drain of urgency. He had given lectures about it. He had graded papers about it. He had written 200 pages about it, slowly, across 3 years, and had not finished. Repatriation. He had taught it as a question. He understood now that for some people, for a long time, it had not been a question at all. It had been a job. Eleanor served 14 months. Martin learned this from a brief notice in a legal newsletter he subscribed to for professional reasons rather than personal ones. He did not hear from her directly. 2 years after her release, he was reading on a Sunday afternoon when an article caught his attention. A collection of pre-Columbian masks, 43 pieces, removed from a site in southern Mexico in the 1970s, documented as having passed through 4 private collections before disappearing from a London inventory in 2019, had been quietly transferred to a museum in Mexico City. The handoff had been arranged through an anonymous intermediary. The paperwork credited no individual. The museum's director, in a short statement, said only that they had been waiting a long time. Martin read the article twice. Then he got up and went to the kitchen drawer, the one where he kept small things he had not thrown away for reasons he could not fully explain, and he found the grocery list. Eleanor had written it for him 18 months into their acquaintance, on a day when his hands had been shaking from a medication adjustment and he had not wanted to admit it. She had written the list without being asked, in a careful, small hand, each item on its own line. He held it for a moment. He thought about the bronze figures, the carved panels, the 600-year-old manuscript. He thought about the 43 masks and the 4 years they had waited in a London inventory while Eleanor was arrested and charged and sentenced and released. He thought about whoever had carried the work forward after she was gone, in the quiet and without credit, until it was finished. He could not know if she had arranged it before her arrest. He could not know how much of what she had built had continued without her. He did not have proof that the handwriting on the accompanying letter, the careful, small hand described briefly in one account Martin had found, was hers. He folded the grocery list and put it back in the drawer. Some things were not his to know. He had understood that, as a historian, for a long time. He was only now beginning to understand it as a neighbor. Story notes. Fictional narrative. The broader subject, legal and moral debates around the repatriation of cultural objects removed through colonial seizure, wartime looting, and fraudulent sales, reflects ongoing real-world discussions and legal cases. No specific real individuals are depicted.